He stepped into the main lobby in a tailored suit holding a sleek leather briefcase, but was mistaken for a delivery man. No one greeted him. No one asked his name. They only saw his skin color and decided his place in that house of power. But they didn't know that the man they were trying to shoo away was the new CEO of the entire corporation, the one who had just signed a $10 million reinvestment to save the company from bankruptcy. And the most memorable thing wasn't how he turned the tables, but how he chose forgiveness over retaliation. Chapter 1. The man who entered the wrong lobby. They looked at him as if he had wandered into their world by mistake, as if a dark ink stain had accidentally touched the pristine white page of a flawless financial report. The main lobby of Mallister and Rowe's headquarters that morning retained its usual impeccable sheen glossy marble floors, soft light streaming through towering glass windows, reflecting off walls adorned with gold plaques commemorating million-dollar deals. Everything exuded control and glamour, a place where every step seemed programmed to preserve order. And then Malcolm Reed walked in, a black man in a perfectly tailored suit, a black leather briefcase in hand, his gaze calm but uninviting. He wasn't flustered, hurried, or ostentatious. His stride didn't demand attention, yet it drew scrutiny precisely because of that. He walked straight to the reception desk at 8:45 a.m. 15 minutes before the meeting he'd been invited to 2 weeks earlier, with an invitation bearing an executive's signature. But at that moment it seemed to mean nothing. The receptionist didn't look up. She stared at her screen as if Malcolm didn't exist. He waited a beat, then spoke softly but clearly. "Good morning. I have a 9 a.m. meeting on the executive floor." The clacking of her keyboard didn't pause. Only the reflection of the screen on her glasses moved. No greeting, no questions, no sign she'd heard him. Malcolm patiently repeated himself, raising his voice slightly, but was met with silence disguised as professionalism. A movement to his right made him turn. A short, sturdy man in a security uniform with a name tag reading Kinley approached. Without questions or identity checks, he said in a weary tone accustomed to giving orders rather than listening, "Delivery entrance is in the back, sir. This area is for management-level personnel only." Malcolm paused for a moment, not because of the words, but because of the speed of the judgment. He glanced at his pristine suit, the briefcase in his hand, then looked up at Kinley. "I'm not delivering anything, sir. I have a meeting on the 32nd floor. My name is Malcolm Reed." Kinley's eyes narrowed as if he needed to translate what he'd just heard. "This area requires a guest list check. Please exit through the main door and go to the partner or supplier desk. Are you sure you're not on the wrong floor?" Malcolm didn't respond immediately. He glanced at the receptionist, still unresponsive. No one wondered why he was there. They simply agreed he didn't belong. He didn't argue. Instead, he gave a faint smile, pulled out his phone, and opened the invitation email. But Kinley didn't bother to look. His hand rested on the radio clipped to his belt, not threatening, but sending a message. Malcolm stepped back, not in retreat, but to observe. He moved toward the nearby waiting area. No sign explicitly marked it for those without authority, but everyone understood it as such. He didn't sit. He didn't need to. He checked his watch. 8:49, 11 minutes until a meeting that could shape the company's next financial quarter. Suddenly, from the elevators, 3 men in suits emerged, laughing loudly, coffees in hand. When they saw Malcolm standing there, their laughter quieted slightly, but not enough to stop one of them. Aiden from whispering loudly enough, "Did someone order office supplies?" Malcolm heard it. He didn't react. He only glanced over with a cold, unreadable look. Another man, Connor, red-haired with a smirking mouth, stepped closer, tilting his head. "Lost your floor. This is the executive area. Freight elevators are in the back." Malcolm responded in a low, calm voice, "I know exactly where I am. Do you?" Connor faltered, slightly unaccustomed to a response so quiet yet sharp as a blade. And at that moment, Greg Saunders approached. He needed no introduction. Greg's presence was always heralded by the hard click of his shoes and in gaze that never warmed. He stopped when he saw Malcolm, scanning him from shoes to collar, pausing at his skin. "Can I help you?" Greg asked, not out of curiosity but suspicion. "Malcolm Reed. I'm here for a 9 a.m. meeting." Greg didn't shake hands or nod. He spoke slowly, deliberately. "Who invited you?" "Mr. Carraway's office, Trark Acquisition." A raised eyebrow, then a mocking smile curled at Greg's lips. "There must be some mistake. We don't invite third parties to strategic meetings." Malcolm didn't back down. "If you need to verify, I can wait inside the meeting, not out here." The air grew heavy. Connor smirked. Greg reached into his pocket for his phone, clearly about to call security when Mr. Reed, a woman's voice called from the hallway. All heads turned. A young woman in a navy blazer, holding a tablet, hurried toward them. Sorry to keep you waiting. They're expecting you on the 32nd floor, meeting room 12. Greg froze. Connor, Aiden, and Blake went silent. Malcolm said nothing. He nodded to the assistant and strode toward the elevator. He didn't need to explain. His presence was the answer. Chapter 2. The chair held tight. Some chairs are more than furniture. They are symbols, silent declarations of power control, and sometimes the fear of losing one's place. When Malcolm stepped into the 32nd floor meeting room at Mallister and Rowe, no one stood to greet him. The glass door closed behind him with a soft click, as if emphasizing that he'd entered a domain reserved for the approved. Unfortunately, no one in the room thought he was one of them. There was no nameplate for Malcolm at the table, no spare chair. No one asked if he needed anything. Eyes scanned him like they were proofreading an important document, spotting an error, something out of place, something to erase. Greg Saunders sat at the head of the table, hands resting on a project proposal, his face barely concealing irritation. To his left was Lana, his assistant typing notes. To his right were senior managers Joanna Victor and a few others with resumes shinier than their actual achievements. Greg didn't greet him. He leaned back, looked up, and asked loudly enough for all to hear, "Who's our guest? Anyone invite him?" No one answered. Lana looked up about to speak, but Greg waved her off as if anticipating her response. "We're in a high-level strategy meeting, friend. People at this table usually go through several rounds of approval." Malcolm scanned the room. He wasn't angry. He didn't smile. Malcolm Reed. "I was invited by Mr. Carraway's office. I'm here per the invitation." Greg slowly extended his hand. "Let me see it." Malcolm opened his briefcase, pulled out a sheet of fine paper with an embossed seal and a clear signature. Greg didn't take it. He glanced at it, then deliberately tore it in half. The sound of ripping paper echoed coldly in the silent room. "I don't care who signed it. Callaway's gone. I'm running this meeting, and your name isn't on today's list." Malcolm carefully gathered the torn pieces, folding them as if they still held value. He spoke evenly, clearly sharp as glass. "You're quick to assume you're the one who decides." Greg's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me, who do you think you're talking to?" Malcolm stepped closer, not crossing the table's boundary. He didn't shout. He held his gaze steady. "It's not you I need to prove anything to. But it seems you need to prove a lot to yourself." A small huff came from someone on the left side of the table. Maybe Victor. Maybe someone's conscience waking up. But Greg didn't notice. He turned to Lana. "Call security. This man needs to be escorted to the lobby." Lana hesitated. "Greg, maybe we should—" "I said call security. This is an executive meeting, not a career fair." At that moment, the door swung open. All eyes turned to the new arrival, Eleanor Blackwood. If Greg was a symbol of old power, Eleanor was the knock of reality. Tall, sharp, her silver hair neatly pinned, she needed no introduction. No one in finance didn't know her name. Chairwoman of the investment board at Worthington Capital Holdings, the parent company behind Mallister and Rowe. Greg shot to his feet. "Chairwoman Blackwood, we didn't know you were coming today." Eleanor stepped forward, holding a slim folder, her eyes sweeping the room as if assessing the quality of each person. She stopped beside Malcolm. "That's because I didn't announce it. Some things are better witnessed firsthand." Greg stammered, Is there a problem?" Eleanor didn't answer him. She turned to the room. "Let me introduce Mr. Malcolm Reed. Some of you may not have met him. That changes today." Greg frowned. "Met in what capacity?" Eleanor placed her folder on the table. "Malcolm is the new CEO of Mallister and Rowe, effective immediately." The room froze. Greg went rigid. Lana dropped her pen. Victor's eyes widened. No one spoke. Eleanor continued. "Mr. Reed didn't just participate in the Triarch deal. He was the one behind the $10 million reinvestment that saved this company from dissolution. The board has voted. Mr. Reed is authorized to lead the entire restructuring process starting today." Greg opened his mouth to protest but found no words. Malcolm didn't look at him. He opened his briefcase, pulled out a black folder, and placed it gently on the table. "This contains all legal documents, the investment commitment, the list of the previous executive team, and the restructuring proposal. I won't ask anyone to stand, but I expect everyone from now on to know who's sitting in this chair." Chapter 3, The Exposure, 1,000 words. Not every fall makes a sound. Some collapses happen in silence, and that's what makes them more terrifying than any crash. The 32nd floor meeting room sank into an eerie quiet after Eleanor Blackwood announced that executive power had been transferred to Malcolm Reed. Greg Saunders stood there, hands on the table, eyes blinking rapidly, as if doused with cold water. The entire room was silent, each executive seemingly trying to recalibrate their place in the new hierarchy. Malcolm didn't revel in the moment. He didn't gloat or act triumphant. But the way he walked to the head of the table, placed his hand on the polished wood, and spoke with the calm of routine business. That's what unnerved them. I'm not here to fight for a chair. I'm here to work. And the first task is to expose what's been hidden under the silk rug of this office. He opened his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick report labeled in red confidential, internal risk audit. The room's lights dimmed and the projector flicked on. The first slide appeared: internal leadership risk metrics. Q2 with a bar chart highlighting 3 names. Greg Saunders topped the list, his red bar soaring above the safety threshold. This is the result of 3 months of anonymous employee evaluations, combined with behavioral data complaints, turnover rates, and perceptions of toxic culture. We no longer measure performance by gut feelings. We measure it by its real impact on people. Greg broke the silence, his voice firm but trembling slightly. What is this internal reports? Like this have no administrative weight? Malcolm turned to him. For the first time, his voice wasn't neutral. You're wrong. This report has been approved by Worthington's Oversight Board, and with my current authority, I'm permitted to use it to assess any leader's suitability. He clicked the remote. The slide changed to a list of complaints shelved over the past 12 months, most tied to Greg's department. A few others in the room lowered their heads, knowing the chain of accountability didn't stop at one person. I'm not here to drag anyone into a public trial, Malcolm said, eyes locked on Greg. But the truth can't keep being swept under the boardroom table. Greg let out a dry laugh. Convenient how the truth shows up just when you want to take someone down. Malcolm didn't respond. He clicked the remote again. The final slide appeared: Worthington Capital Investment Statement, Asset Code 11.42B, $10,000, $1,000 USD, Mallister and Rowe, reinvestment. This is why I'm sitting here. Not because of a business card, but because I believe this company is worth saving. And to save it, I need to remove anything choking the decency out of this place. Eleanor Blackwood stood, her voice low but sharp. As chairwoman of the parent company's board, I announce Gregory Saunders is suspended effective immediately. All system access and internal accounts will be disabled within 15 minutes. Greg paled. You can't be serious. Victor, the deputy operations director, shrugged. Greg, she's very serious, and you know why. A security officer quietly entered, whispering to Greg that he would be assisted out of the building. No one stood. No one saw him off. Greg was no longer the center, just a living lesson closed in silence. Weeks later, a light drizzle fell. In a small cafe near the office district, Malcolm sat alone. The door opened and Kinley walked in, different from that day. No uniform, no radio, just a middle-aged man carrying something heavy in his heart. I'm not here to ask for a job, Kinley said immediately, as if afraid of being misunderstood. Malcolm nodded, gesturing to a seat, not interrupting. I didn't recognize who you were. That's my mistake. But not because you're the CEO, because I forgot how to see people with normal eyes. They taught me to be cautious. They didn't teach me to respect. Malcolm slowly set down his coffee. His gaze wasn't harsh. You're not a bad person. You're just a product of a system that teaches people to fear the wrong person more than respect the right one. A moment of silence, not awkward but understanding. Malcolm pulled out a business card and scribbled a few lines on the back. This is the contact for a security partner of mine. They need experienced people willing to learn from scratch. No one's born knowing what's right, but everyone deserves a chance to make it right. Kinley nodded, his eyes slightly red. No promises were made, just a handshake, and for him that was enough. Back at Mallister and Rowe, Malcolm walked through the lobby, and the employees' gazes seemed different. Not because he was CEO, but because he no longer needed to prove anything. He entered the meeting room. On the table, a new file: Organizational Culture Overhaul Plan, Phase 1, Reassessing All Leadership Processes, Chapter 4, Self-Respect and Second Chances. After Malcolm Reed officially took the helm as CEO of Mallister and Rowe, the company entered a phase of cautious silence. No one openly resisted, but no one was truly open either. The looks in the hallways were no longer mocking, but they didn't yet carry trust. Cultural shifts always begin with such wary silences. Then Aidan Moore's name landed on Malcolm's desk, a recommendation from HR, accompanied by an internal review including surveillance footage from that morning when Aidan and two colleagues mocked Malcolm in the elevator lobby. No one forced Malcolm to act harshly, but in the new atmosphere, those who had stayed silent or joined in were being called out. Aidan was on the formal disciplinary review list. Small meeting room, executive floor, 2:00 p.m. Thursday, Aidan entered, his face stiff. His suit was impeccable, his tie almost suffocatingly tight, but his eyes were glued to the floor like a self-confessed guilty party. Before him sat Malcolm and the HR director with an open file. No one started with accusations. Aidan spoke first, and it silenced the room for a moment. "I'm not here to make excuses." His voice trembled, but didn't waver. "I didn't just laugh at you that day. I laughed because I thought I was on the winning side." The words as they left his mouth were like a dagger to his own self-respect. Aidan took a deep breath and continued. "I saw you being stopped by security, saw the receptionist ignore you, saw Greg look at you like an outsider. And I didn't react. I laughed. Because I thought that silence meant I was on the right side. The side of power, the side of sameness." A long pause followed. Malcolm didn't take notes, nod, or interrupt. Aidan bowed his head lower. "And now I understand. I was just borrowing someone else's position to exist." The HR director glanced at Malcolm, preparing to suggest a mild but cautionary disciplinary action. But Malcolm slowly closed the file and looked directly at Aidan. "You know you were wrong. That's the first thing worth respecting. But remorse only matters if it turns into meaningful action." Aidan looked confused. Malcolm continued. "Mallister and Rowe is restarting its diversity and inclusion program, not as a PR campaign, but as a genuine rebuilding process. I want it led by someone who isn't perfect, someone who's seen bias firsthand with their own eyes." The HR director's eyes widened. Aidan stared at Malcolm, stunned. "You mean me?" Malcolm nodded. "If you're willing to tell your story of failure, publicly, honestly, and use it to drive change in others, then you deserve a chance." Aidan sat there silent for a few seconds. But for the first time since entering the room, he lifted his head straight, unflinching. 2 weeks later, 5th floor conference hall, new staff training. The room was packed. No one knew who the opening speaker was. When Aidan stepped onto the stage, a few whispers rippled through. But when he began speaking, no one dared interrupt. "I used to think staying silent in the face of injustice was safe, but no one told me. It's also a form of complicity. I laughed at someone I thought didn't belong here, and that same person taught me what integrity means." The applause wasn't thunderous, but it came from those who'd once felt sidelined, now seeing themselves in Aidan's story. CEO's office. Late that afternoon, Malcolm received a message from the training department head. Aidan spoke like someone who's lived through what he described. Not for PR, but to make amends. Malcolm gave a faint smile. By the window, the sunset reflected off Mallister and Rowe's logo. For the first time in years, it seemed to carry new meaning. Malcolm wasn't just a CEO. He was redefining what worthy meant in a company long accustomed to the veneer of power. He stepped into the hallway. There, Aidan was talking to a new employee, not lecturing, but listening. Chapter 5, New Culture, New Doors. Culture doesn't change with declarations. It changes through actions repeated long enough to become habits and deep enough to become conscience. 3 months after Malcolm Reed took the CEO chair at Mallister and Rowe, changes began to take root, not loudly, not with banners, but spreading like light-piercing morning fog. No one was forced to be open, but everyone understood that the silence once deemed harmless was no longer a safe option. The corporate culture entered an unnamed reckoning, and Malcolm, with his calm but uncompromising demeanor, stood at the forefront, not to punish, but to rebuild. Executive meeting room, 8:00 a.m., Monday. Malcolm entered, followed by Eleanor Blackwood. The large screen at the head of the table displayed a new logo, Integrity Index. Every person, every action, every opportunity. He stood not sitting. His voice was steady, neither rallying nor intimidating. Starting today, all managers will participate in a 3-week leadership ethics evaluation. Results from anonymous assessments will directly impact promotions, bonuses, and continued tenure. Victor Halpern, Deputy Operations Director, frowned. We're letting employees evaluate their superiors. Not to punish, Malcolm replied, but to reflect. Not everyone in a high seat sees themselves clearly. A few heads nodded slightly. Not out of agreement, but because they understood from now on keeping a seat was no longer a default privilege. Partner training room. Week 4, post-overhaul. Kinley, the guard who once stopped Malcolm in the lobby, stepped out of the final class of a specialized security training course. His new uniform was crisply pressed. More importantly, his eyes no longer carried the weight of guilt. Today he received his recertification and was officially hired into the security coordination team at one of the company's partner firms. In a video from the certification ceremony he shared, "There was a time I thought I'd spend my life guarding doors. Now I know some doors are opened by attitude, not authority." Malcolm, watching the footage in his office, nodded and said briefly to his assistant, "Send congratulations," and thank him for daring to come back. Internal training hall. Friday, week 6. Aiden, in a light blue shirt, stood confidently on the stage. Before him were nearly 100 employees, new and old, from interns to mid-level managers. "I wasn't given a chance because I deserved it. I was given one because I dared to admit I wasn't worthy." The room wasn't loud, but the looks directed at Aiden were no longer skeptical. He wasn't just the man who'd erred. He was the one who turned his mistake into a lesson, not a mark of shame. After the session, a female employee approached. "Thank you. I used to be someone who didn't dare speak. Now I feel I have a voice." Aiden smiled faintly. "Then we're all heading in the right direction." Executive office, end of quarter. Instead of a financial report, Malcolm's desk held a different file: proposal for recruitment and promotion policy redesign. Tying value to character. Contents included integrating ethics evaluation results into promotion reviews, building a mentorship program between managers and junior staff based on behavioral fairness, not just performance, creating a cultural allies network, former wrongdoers, now supporting retraining efforts. Eleanor entered midway, skimmed a few pages, and set it down. "You're not just rebuilding the company, you're redefining leadership." Malcolm didn't reply immediately. He looked out the window where employees moved in and out laughing, not because the environment was easy, but because they no longer had to guard against each other. 7 months later, Social Enterprise Conference in Oakland. A video surfaced on social media filmed by an attendee's phone. In it, Greg Saunders, once suspended, stood before a class of Black, Latino, and immigrant students. "I used to be the reason people were pushed out of boardrooms. Now I want to be the reason they can walk in." When a student asked, "Why did you change?" Greg's voice caught, "Because someone didn't crush me when they had the power to. Instead, they handed me a mirror." Mallister and Rowe Building, year-end sunset. Malcolm stood before an internal projection screen where Greg's speech clip had just ended. No one knew what he was thinking, but when Eleanor entered and asked, "What do you think?" he only smiled faintly. "Justice isn't the end. It's the door for people to choose themselves again." He turned away, pulling a new file from his briefcase: Next Generation Leadership Succession Program. Proposal for Aiden Moore to lead launch. Malcolm Reed's story isn't just about turning the tables in a boardroom steeped in prejudice. It's proof that the greatest strength lies not in titles or loud voices, but in the steadfastness of dignity, in the ability to see the human behind the society's labels. Mallister and Rowe was once a place where power was preserved by chairs, nameplates, and silent consensus. But then a calm man walked into the lobby without shouting who he was and changed everything. He didn't use power to retaliate. He used it to rebuild, to open doors once closed by bias. The story also reminds us that mistakes don't have to be life sentences. Aiden, Kinley, and even Greg, each once on the wrong side, had the chance to look back, choose again, and live as better versions of themselves. But that only happens when justice walks with compassion and when leadership is built on truth, not fear. Malcolm didn't just lead a company. He led a new culture where differences aren't erased, where those who erred aren't forever framed, and where the voice of conscience rings louder than the commands of titles. Because in the end, fairness isn't about making everyone bow the same, it's about helping each person stand the right way.